Today I'm talking to Mateo. He's an entrepreneur originally from California, but now resides in Hague, Netherlands. If you know anything about Netherlands, you will not be surprised that we're going to be talking agrotech and sustainability. Mateo takes us on a journey from becoming a master beekeeper all the way to creating the world's largest beekeeping community. His beekeeping platform Swarmed is a great example of how a niche business that's seemingly unknown is creating a lot of positive in the world. Mateo is a great speaker, a delight to listen to, and a sponge for knowledge. If you like the show or even think you would be a good fit for it, just find the contact somewhere around here and shoot me a message.
So maybe let's start from what you're doing right now, where you're at right now, and then we're going to go back to who you are afterwards and we'll discover the whole childhood part, if whatever you're comfortable sharing. And at the very end, we're going to jump into the future. So we're going to do a little bit of loop-a-loop.
Yeah, sure.
Does that sound good?
Yeah. What I'm working on right now full time is what I generically refer to as lead generation and data tools for beekeepers. Sounds like couching it in business terms that everyone understands, but it is super niche. And so the leads that we're talking about here are actually honeybee swarms, which most people don't know what to think about when I bring this up. But essentially in the spring and summer, this is the way honeybee colonies reproduce, is they send out about half the colony. That's like 60,000 honeybees that then land on a building, a car, your house, wherever. And as urban beekeeping has become more popular over the last 10, 15 years, these swarms happen in urban, suburban areas, right? And so hundreds of thousands of times a year, so more often than maybe most people would think, a swarm lands on someone's house, right? And most people, they flip out, they have no clue what to do. A lot of people have a vague idea that you should save the bees, but of course, it can be quite a scary experience when tens of thousands of bees land, all come together in a clump. And so people in the US where the business started, they call 911, so the emergency services number, or they're calling an exterminator. Because finding a beekeeper is hard. You have sort of a word of mouth is the way this usually goes. And most beekeepers are hobbyists, and so they're hard to reach. And so what we've built now is the largest database of beekeepers really in the world, as far as we know, responding to these swarms. We have about 10,000 beekeepers signed up who, when you fill out a report on our website or through one of the nonprofit partners, that report gets routed to the nearest beekeeper. So the core idea is really, really simple. Routing these leads to beekeepers who usually actually respond for free or depending on the complexity, are quoting their own price as a contractor. I've heard people say to me, oh, so this is Dash for beekeepers or something like that, where you order a beekeeper and they come. Not quite. It's a bit more the model of a pest control company, but the focus is more on well, not killing the bees, but protecting the bees and more now too, using the data that we've collected. We're the only ones collecting this data. I said this is really niche. And using that data to advance honeybee research, because there's so much work to be done here. Bees are under threat, really broadly speaking. And so using the data that we've collected now to advance research as well. So it's broad, and the project is broadened from this really core initial goal of solving this one specific problem that I personally had as a beekeeper and that resonated with the community and has grown and grown. And now the broader biodiversity data mapping, what can we be doing with this data that we're collecting?
There's a lot to uncover. So let's talk about bees more.
Yeah, sure.
I think you said it yourself. It's very niche. I vaguely personally know that we should protect bees, but also from a family that has always been close to nature. I've been in the zoo this morning, which is wholesome for something. But so tell me more about just bees and why are they suddenly in danger? Why are they doing all of this?
I think a lot of people get the idea from the sort of save the bee discussion that you hear. People get the idea that bees are maybe endangered and are surprised when they see that they're not on the endangered species list with pandas, for example, because it's a little bit different. There are, for example, in the US last year, there was a record number of bee colonies. So last year in the US, there were 2.7 million bee colonies. That's more colonies than there ever have been. At the same time, though, the annual loss rate survey just came out, and 60% of those colonies died last year, which is about a 20% jump from the year before. And so the way I like to talk about this is it's less that bees are dying out. It's that and when we say bees, right, there are 20,000 species of bees, but here we're talking specifically about Apis mellifera, so the European honeybee. So I guess what you and I kind of think about is when we think honeybee, that bee. And that's the bee most commonly kept by humans. And what we talk about more that less that they're dying out and more that beekeeping is becoming more difficult. And that the concern is that eventually beekeepers won't be able to keep up anymore. So that if the loss rate goes from 40% to 60% to 70%, then at some point beekeepers, and already beekeepers now are quitting, right? Are saying, my operation, if I do this as a small business, I can't keep up. I lost 60% of my colonies, right? Imagine a sheep herder who loses 60% of his flock every year, right? That is brutal. And so the race has been on for almost 10 years now to address the threats and help beekeepers cope with these rising loss rates. And progress is being made on all kinds of fronts, and that we want to be a part of that. But it's a difficult and multifaceted problem. It's a really interesting one to work on.
Okay. So what is the reason for
all kinds of things? I'll say the number one is called the Varroa destructor mite. Okay. It's a parasitic mite. It looks like a little crab that walks all over the bee. In proportion to the bee's body, it's the size of a dinner plate. So if you or I had a dinner plate sized parasite on us, that's how big that is. And they spread diseases between the bees and contribute, they weaken the bees and contribute to the spread of disease, and they die out. And that's what they think now is the major cause behind this year's high loss rates. So the disease is spread by this mite, but it's a lot of other stuff too. Lack of forage, right? So if there's not enough food planted for the bees, or the diversity of forage. So a lot of bees are used in the commercial agriculture industry, especially in the US. Something like 80% of the world's almonds come from one small area in California where they're pollinated by honeybees. And so literally thousands of colonies, so millions, if not billions of honeybees are moved to California early in the spring because the bloom starts in April before anything else is blooming. They move all the colonies there because beekeepers make good money renting their colonies out to the almond orchards because the almonds they need, almonds are expensive. Yeah. The farmers, they need pollination services. And so they rent out their colonies. And of course, the bees, they exchange diseases as they come into contact with bees from across the US. And they're only eating almonds during this time, right? Because if you go to the Central Valley where these are planted, you see almonds as far as the eye can see, right? Just unimaginable how far these fields stretch. And so the bees are only eating almond, right? And it's like if you or I would eat just pasta all the time, right? It's not good for us. And then we catch the flu as well because we're meeting people from all over the world, right? And the disease spreads. And so the loss rates in the commercial industry and the commercial migratory industry are staggering. And there's been some very interesting articles written about this as well. And so that's one of the issues to just how bees are treated, right? There's big differences between how I beekeep in my backyard with my 2 colonies versus how a commercial operation with 600 colonies would beekeep. And the loss rates adjust accordingly too, yeah. When we talk about bees dying off in general too, we also can't forget the 19,999 other species of honeybees. It's not just honeybees, and the threats are more so because they're not managed by humans. More habitat loss, again, lack of forage, parasites, diseases, but really habitat loss too. Like a lot of other bees don't nest in big colonies. They nest in solitary little tubes. So dried out reeds, things like that. And if you think of a garden that is just lawn, there's no habitat there for honeybees or any bees. And so those bees are also just not seeing as much habitat, right? And that's why you see those bee hotels around, little blocks of wood, little houses with little holes drilled in them. And those are for solitary nesting bees.
Okay. It's like a birdhouses, but for bees.
Exactly.
Got it. So far, I love your enthusiasm about this. It seems like it's a very personal thing as well. You said you have your own 2 beehives at home. So let's maybe switch over to the personal side of this. Where is this where it originated, where you were keeping your own bees and you were like, this is so hard? Or people calling you?
Yeah, so this was so beekeeping was my pandemic hobby. Right? I think some people started baking sourdough bread and I got into beekeeping.
Okay.
And like a lot of people got super into it. The original thing that actually got me interested was a crowdfunding campaign about 10 years ago by a company that built a product that made beekeeping a little bit easier. And they built a sort of self-harvesting beehive, really cool company, and got someone like me who grew up in the suburbs thinking, oh, I could be a beekeeper too, right? This isn't something that just farmers do. That I could, in my small suburban backyard, also be a beekeeper. And got into the hobby during COVID when I had some free time, learned everything I could, became a master beekeeper, which is always fun to tell people. It sounds like a medieval guild type of thing. Yeah. So I was an apprentice beekeeper and then journeyman beekeeper, and then I became a master beekeeper. And would spend my spring chasing after swarms and trying to catch swarms as a way to replenish my own colonies and grow my own, it's called an apiary, my bee garden. Because bees are expensive, right? So you're paying $150, $200 for a new colony. And so that's why now with Swarmed, with this company, we've saved beekeepers about $500,000 in costs of replacing their beehives. So there's like an economic factor there for beekeepers, not just time and convenience. But hearing about these swarms is quite difficult, right? We've talked about how it's hard for the public to find beekeepers. But beekeepers, basically, unless you're the guy in the community that people know, if you've been beekeeping for 30 years and people in the neighborhood know you, if you're not that guy, you're combing through Facebook, Nextdoor, Reddit, wherever people are maybe posting. And so I would sit there in the summer, refreshing my phone on Nextdoor, hoping to see a post from some local homeowner saying, oh my God, bees in my backyard, what do I do? And hoping to see that fast enough because you need to respond within an hour or 2. And that's a lot of scrolling, trying to stay that up to date on posts. And so really wanted to build a tool to make it easier to get those alerts and more convenient. And so I think like a lot of entrepreneurs started out fixing a problem that I had for myself. I think I have a lot of different strategies for myself for lowering the barriers to entry to make it easier to just get started. There's all kinds of things that make it easier just to get started. But I think one of them is building something for yourself where you say, okay, if nobody uses this, I would use this, right? And if it only works in, like, my thinking was, if it only works in my small neighborhood, I'll already be happy because then I'll get a benefit from this. I'll be able to use it in my neighborhood, right? And that's where it started. I started posting about this neighborhood, saying, if you see a swarm, here's the link, go post it, right? And you grew and grew from there. So that's an easy way to start, right? It's build something for yourself.
I fully agree. That's how I do, and usually horribly end up with, and the only thing I would use it myself. So
yeah,
sweet, but not a business eventually, right?
Yeah, that's fair too.
So how long ago has that been?
About a year and a half ago.
Okay. So a year and a half ago, you started posting about it. Hey, I actually built like a little spreadsheet system or is that when you started?
Yeah, I was a working MVP. We could have started with this sort of the Wizard of Oz MVP, right? Of just me with the spreadsheet in the background. But I started with a fully functional MVP that I built in a couple of weeks and then deployed it and tried it out.
Got it. So maybe we can get into your background because it sounds like it's fairly technical.
No.
Wow.
Not at all technical.
That's a surprise there. Yeah. So you jumped into an MVP instead of a spreadsheeting, which might have been actually the way to go.
I had never heard of like a Wizard of Oz MVP before. And so I didn't think of this.
So what is your background? Maybe let's start.
Yeah.
We can get into that.
So I studied history and international affairs for my bachelor. And so all of my research and work had been sort of political economics, history, that sort of thing. So this academic background was absolutely not the toolkit necessarily that I needed, although I still find it helpful. So I got into, the MVP was built in Bubble, so a no-code editor, because that seemed like a way for me to teach myself to build a custom web app. I'd used WordPress. I'd been around these sort of user-friendly tools, WordPress, whatever, but I didn't need a custom web app, right? My site is not complicated per se, or the MVP wasn't, but it wasn't something that you could do in WordPress. And so taught myself how to use Bubble and built the first MVP myself and really enjoyed that learning process, right? Just learning and building. And it was an all day just building the login workflow, but that was super satisfying. And now we have a developer and it moves a little faster and he does most of the work. But I still like that it's built in no code because then I'm able to, as a non-technical person, get in there and make changes. I worked for a startup and a lot of this approach was informed by that too. I worked for a startup that thought that to be a real startup, they needed to have a custom hard-coded website. When in reality, all they really needed for what they were actually doing at the time was a Shopify site. They were just selling their product, right? It was a hardware product. They did not need more than that. They didn't have a user dashboard, right? So there wasn't even a need for that. Even then, they could have done that with low code, no code tools, right? But they really thought that to be a real startup, you needed a hard-coded website and a developer. And what that in practice meant, and to be able to afford it, they had a developer in Nigeria, same time zone, but every time they wanted to make a change, if the buy button needed to change color or the price needed to change color, it was like a 2-day process of back and forth with the developer saying, is this how you want it? No, not quite. Like this? Yes, perfect, right? And that is not agile. That is not fast. That is not the startup approach, if you ask me. And to learn from that it should be flexible, it should be custom, but it should also be flexible. And so I picked a framework that I would be able to get into quickly. And so I started with Bubble and have now gotten deeper and deeper into this and widened my tech stack and widened my own technical skills, but started out completely non-technical.
It's great. They would love to hear that probably, especially nowadays that's,
a whole other frontier
with whole new AI stuff. Is that something that you've shifted over?
Not for the existing app, just because it didn't make sense to migrate. And Bubble just brought out a mobile app builder too. And so it made sense to stay. So we just did now the big upgrade of the service. So we did a crowdfunding campaign this spring to fund the new upgrades and we're quite successful raising money for that. And now we've built this new dashboard. And that's all built in Bubble. It's quite flexible. You see people build simple web apps, but you also see people build like Airbnb clones in Bubble. So it is quite powerful and didn't make sense, at least to me, to do the whole work of migrating over to a hard-coded website. But the next project will all be vibe coded. Yeah, so I've been digging around in Lovable and Cursor, and so the next ideas will all be vibe coded without a developer to move even faster. Because now even with the no-code approach, now working with a developer on the more complicated parts of the app, it does slow the pace down quite a bit. And if there's a heat wave, the developer's in Pakistan, so there's a heat wave and you can't work for a couple of days, that slows down development of going the AI route too as well. And you can micromanage a little bit better too. So getting into that.
Worked with different teams across my career, and some of them were in India, but some of them were in Nigeria and Lagos, and we're in Ghana with one of the startups. And yes, there's a rain season. Internet is out.
India is attacking, and something happens.
We never had worries. That's a new thing.
That slowed down development. We're a week behind schedule right now.
Ukraine actually did happen for one of our partners. So we were working with them. I was like, that is the thing.
We're behind schedule in the development timeline. And I think a heat wave and India threatening Pakistan have set us back about a week. But not too bad. We're back on track.
You cannot really complain.
You cannot complain.
Exactly. You're in a beautiful weather in Hague.
No, and I'm glad our developer's okay. We've worked together for a year and a half now. It's been cool to work with a developer too. It's my first experience doing that, and being able to hire a contractor at a rate that I can pay and that he makes good money at doing was huge. I didn't realize that was so easy.
To hire someone.
Hiring a developer would have seemed like such a barrier that I would have gone and looked for a technical co-founder, where now I don't know if I would look for I hire a developer or now vibe code it, right?
Yes. Which is another segue into you're a solo founder and how do you perceive the whole notion of needing a co-founder to do what you want?
I've only ever built my own ideas. And so I'm curious to try out building with someone else. I think it comes with its own challenges and opportunities. I've definitely wished for just the time that another person brings, right? And not that I need a technical co-founder per se, but just that having another person to do outreach and do all the work that I do, right, doubles your own time. So I've seen the appeal because it's such a niche project. And because to be honest, it's not B2B SaaS. And so you can't really offer someone the hockey stick growth curve that I think some people are looking for when they come on as a co-founder. And so I think a little bit didn't make sense. I'm not looking to raise venture capital for this either. It's a bit of a different route for a startup to go. Government grants are a bit more the area for us. Crowdfunding from the community, that sort of thing, bootstrapping this whole thing. And so for some of these things, the need for a co-founder wasn't so much there. Could definitely have been useful at times. And I think in the future for other ideas would try to bring on someone complementary, but especially because it's such a niche field, I think it's hard to get someone who can understand it as well and understand the customer well too, because it is beekeepers are an interesting customer to build for. And so I think it would have been important to find someone who really knew them, and that's a tough person to find.
Let's get into some of the stories from beekeepers. If you have, do you have a favorite story with someone you've tried to onboard? And they've been maybe reluctant because we've been around for 50 years.
Yeah. So exactly what you're saying. Beekeepers are an interesting mix of extremely conservative, resistant to new things. They tend to be older white guys who are slow to adapt, and at the same time extremely entrepreneurial. A little bit that like farmer gene of if something breaks, I'm gonna slap some duct tape on it and weld it together myself, right? Like that sort of approach. And so I get lots of emails from people saying, "Great idea. I had this idea myself. The idea is not revolutionary in any way. Quite simple. I had this idea myself. Always wish someone would build it, or I never got around to it." So lots of people have had this idea, but I also my early signs of traction were the first haters, and of course, it kind of hits you first, but then realize that it's a form of impact. If people are writing you angry emails, then you're obviously having a reaction and getting some traction. And so as I got the first kind of beekeeper haters who were saying some Silicon Valley crap, I think some were almost turned off by the UI looking a little too polished, even though I think the UI does not look all that polished. And actively, I try not to make the site too techie looking. Right now, we have an AI model in the back end doing image recognition. I think a lot of companies would advertise with this and say, it's AI everything, right? We don't really mention this. And when we do, we talk about image recognition, not AI, right? Because some of these things are just a turn off for beekeepers. And if it's too techie and too slick and too Silicon Valley, they get a little bit turned off. And then I get hate mail that this is, trying to exploit the bee.
Actual mail.
Actual mail. Yeah. Luckily, no one's found out where I live yet. So that's right. I gotta move around. No, but that was for me an early sign of this traction when beekeepers send me angry email saying it's a waste of time, don't do this.
Yeah, that's a perfect. Yeah, hate or love, that's a good marketing.
They're engaging with it.
People are engaged.
Yeah, they're talking about it.
They don't talk about it.
There's an apathy. You can't do anything with that. Yeah, exactly.
We're moving towards your early ventures, and so you said you built a few things, or you've worked on a few things. So we can step through some of these projects that you've looked at and maybe they didn't turn out as well or at all.
Yeah. So this was my first web development project. Prior to that, I'd always done physical projects. I hesitate to say products, but I've always been a very project oriented person. I always wanted to be building something. And so in college, as I was getting into beekeeping, we built a pollinator garden. And so we built, I don't know in meters, but a couple thousand square feet of pollinator garden. We negotiated with the university to get this piece of land, put up a fence, removed the lawn, planted native wildflowers, got the beehives, taught ourselves beekeeping, and then we got deep into off-grid. How we built brought in a contractor to build a custom shed. It was a sloped site, and so quite difficult to build on. Solar, off-grid, rainwater collection to water the garden, and all of these sort of permaculture, gardening hacks and beekeeping all put together into this really quite compact space, which turned into this like student pollinator garden and learning garden. And really during university, and now the more I think about it now in hindsight, that was sort of my startup, right? I had to raise money for it. They are the investors with the university, but had to go to them and pitch to the board and whatever and get funding for this. And so we raised, almost $30,000, $40,000 to build this. And so that was really kind of in many ways, if I hadn't done that, I probably would have built a startup in college, but was doing this really fun hands-on project, getting my hands dirty, building with people. It was something that people were excited about, right? On the weekends, 20 people would come out to dig in the dirt and in the mud and build this thing. And so had my first experiences managing people there too, right? Working with this team. And so that was, I think, very formative. And a lot of my project energy went into that rather than building my own project. And I think that was rewarding, but I couldn't take it with me. Right after I graduated, what do I do now? What's going to satisfy the project? And so the reason too why I got into a web development project was that I wanted something that was more portable. I was going back and forth between the US and Europe and wanted something that I could take with me and work on in either place, right? I didn't have a workshop where I could do a physical product. And so I've done other physical products, happy to talk about those too, but it's much harder to take that with you and move back and forth. And so that was part of what led me into a web development project.
Did you have a lemonade stand when you were growing up or something similar?
My specialty as a kid was, I actually recently came across this again, was drawing complicated machines as birthday gifts. And so cranking out these really complicated assembly lines, right? Pizza store and I think I was ahead of my time here with the pizza assembly lines where the robot mixes the dough and then it gets portioned out on the conveyor belt and then had to visualize the sort of thing that would spread the sauce on the pizza. And so designing, right, all just scribbled on paper and gifting these to relatives as birthday gifts. So I'm sure if I make it big, these will sell for millions one day. But my early concept sketches, I think my earliest project, but I think when I think back, I always had some project. In middle school, so quite young, right? 10 or 12, we had a fully fledged TV studio at the school because there was a teacher who was super into TV production. And this could have hosted a local news show. It was fully, right, had a soundproof booth and a director and a producer. And we took this super seriously. 6 a.m. every day of the week, my parents were driving me there to compete for the director or the producer role of the morning broadcast. And we would work for 2 hours in the morning, putting together the morning broadcast and then delivering the broadcast. And I think that was very much my first introduction to working on a project, on a team, everyone pulling on the same rope together. And I think in many ways similar to what a startup looks like. And that project itch then followed me on and on through high school, through university, and now the postgraduate life.
Nice. So you were seeing 10 or 12 at the time?
Yeah, probably.
Who can remember?
Yeah.
Nice. What motivates you to work on these projects? If you can think of so maybe I'll extend the question, right? You're 10 or 12 and you're just seeing all this production and you're matching a lot of people, working with people, kind of seeing it all come together. Do you feel like that's the main core of it? Or is there something else that you can maybe think of? Why do you like to work on projects?
Yeah. There was working with people, I think, early on, but more and more the light of invention. I think there's Nikola Tesla quote about this. I can't remember verbatim, but talking about the delight of seeing your own creation out in the world. I can think of nothing cooler than seeing your product, and I haven't had this joy fully yet, but seeing your product out in the world, seeing it be used. Of course, with my website, I see every day that it is super satisfying. Seeing all the logs as swarms are reported and as the number of bees saved ticks up every day is super satisfying. But seeing a physical product out in the world being used, I think, is intensely satisfying. And every project, seeing people engage with it. Right now, this garden that we built is now being used by people who don't know me at all. I built this with people, but then life moved on, and now it's being used and influencing people's lives that I've never met and who have no clue who I am. And seeing that the longer term impact is super, super satisfying.
It sounds also like a contribution is something important to you.
Yeah.
Back to the society or some maybe smaller societies like school is a society.
But making something that people care about, right, is super fulfilling. And now I get emails all the time from people who talk about how exciting it was. A bee swarm landed in their yard. They freaked out, Googled, what do I do? Found the website. And then a beekeeper came out and helped them catch the bees and explain to them what was going on here. And it turned from a scary experience to something really exciting. And they learned about honeybees and how important they are and what role they play, and turned into this wonderful experience. And I've had to, I guess, some of these emails were life-changing experience, whatever. And it's always a little bit silly, but it's nice to hear too. It's very satisfying to see that actual people are influenced by this, especially when you're spending 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week in a box working on this. Yeah. It's nice to see that it's out in the world getting used.
So before we get into the future and kind of more of the ideas that maybe are on your mind, the last question I've got is, how does all of this itching around the project come into how does it extrude out of the work, I guess, like maybe personal life?
Well, I build stuff all the time, not just, a lot of my ideas are not marketable in that sense.
Okay.
And when I have ideas that are marketable, they're never $1 billion ideas. My sweet spot is the $10 million idea, maybe. And so I have a lot of totally not marketable ideas that I just tinker away for myself. I'm always building something. I like to work with my hands, especially when I'm now working on this website. Yeah. All the time, I build things for myself, right? I have a fully smart greenhouse cabinet in my apartment.
Okay.
With basically a jungle growing inside of it on like a green wall, and it's waters automatically, lighting, humidity controls, everything. And taught myself to put that all together. It's basically a smart greenhouse cabinet. I'm always building something, and as soon as I'm not working as all out on a project on the website, I'm tinkering away at something else. And so to me, it's very much in all things, I think, curiosity led and not so much led by what is marketable. And I think a lot is just kind of tinkering away at things and then following what works and eventually what doesn't get left behind.
Nice. Curiosity is something that came up 2 days ago with a friend of mine I was doing the interview with as well. And for him, he's a hardware engineer. He's done a lot of things as well. And I love that it keeps coming up. Yes. For my personal sake, it's also a thing that motivates me a lot.
I was a curious kid. I was the kid who turns over the rocks to see what bug is underneath, right? And always want to see how things work, look inside. And so even though I didn't go the engineering route, always wanted to see how things worked. And I like machines and seeing how parts fit together. And so now actually I'm looking to the future. I'm hoping to study product design and get more and more into the actual making of things.
Moves up sort of to future. So you're saying, maybe let's bring that up. So you said you're studying product design. It's like school, or are you just personally?
No, so I'm starting my master in product design at the Technical University here in Delft.
Okay, wow. Is that the reason why you're in the Hague? Okay. Where are you from originally?
California.
So you said also you traveled back and forth in the US and here?
I was still working for a company in Long Beach in California. And so I was going back and forth. It's hard to find housing here. And so I would sublet for a couple months and then go back. And so it was for a while going back and forth. Now I live here full time.
And then once you finish your studies, you think you're going to stay around, or are you going to go back somewhere?
In Europe, probably.
In Europe?
Okay. I think, like I mentioned, a lot of my ideas are not $1 billion ideas. And so sometimes when I run into people here at startup events, they say, why do you leave the Silicon Valley? I always wanted to go there. I just came back from San Francisco. It was amazing, whatever. Yeah. But in the Silicon Valley, if I'm not building a B2B AI wrapper right now, nobody wants to talk to you, right? Nobody's interested in your idea if doesn't present a potential $1 billion addressable or multi-billion dollar addressable market, hockey stick, growth curve, and AI has to be front and center, right? But there are lots of other good ideas and lots of other interesting things to build. It does not have to be $1 billion idea to be a good business. I think the route of VC capital raised to $1 billion or bust is a route. It doesn't seem that appealing to me, and especially a lot of my ideas are biodiversity focused, impact focused, and for that there's a lot more air in Europe, right? There are more events for this, there are more grants for this, subsidies, interest in general, climate tech investors, if I were to go that route. And so it seems like there's just way more air for that sort of work here than in the Silicon Valley. And so the kinds of things that interest me, I think it is better to be here.
Nice. That's a beautiful bit I can use. Thank you. And I agree. I've seen it definitely in Netherlands. It's so many sustainability and just green energy. I love that because you seem very, very grounded in, okay, I have an idea that started as something that was very personal. I was just taking care of a problem for myself, but there's a grander issue and actually it contributes to the society. And it sounds like you really divide up if it's a business opportunity or not, because to you, it's like problem to be solving. Yeah. It seems like there's money in it.
Yeah.
But it's not about the money for you at the end.
It has to be sustainable, of course. And we've been able to turn Swarmed into a sustainable business now. But originally it was a not-for-profit project, right? It was meant to be community tool. I looked into the open source route, and now we have an open source not-for-profit sister project that shares all of the data that we collect for citizen science and researchers to use. And so I'm a big fan of building things open source, sharing things, and especially building for this community that I was a part of. Didn't want to build a product that would disrupt the community in a bad way. I think a lot of that model is disruption is used as a good word a lot of times, but can also be a bad. And so I was trying to toe the line there a bit. So we just did a crowdfunding. So before that, it was all bootstrapped, and now it's grown quite a bit. I'm experiencing the scale-up costs in all of our software tool subscriptions. We've now bumped up to the next tier, and so the costs have gone up quite a bit.
Right.
And of course, the cost of building our new dashboard and really upgrading the service to what I think of as the definitive version of this tool. Right? There's not room for unlimited growth here, right? Business to grow and grow and grow this, but to build it to like a definitive, great tool, that's what we did the crowdfunding for, and to be able to get us over the hurdle for that.
What's the end line?
Yeah, so the end line really is to finish building this dashboard that we're doing, getting beekeepers access to the data that we've collected and visualizing that in different ways. We're now able to predict the likelihood of a swarm on a given day based on past historical data, the trajectory of the season, when nectar, so food sources for the bees, become available. A lot of this is data that nobody else is collecting, and so this is really exciting to be able to, even if our contributions are small to this and our resources limited, it's exciting to be able to contribute what we are able to and what nobody else is able to, because nobody else has tried to or successfully been able to tackle this problem of getting all of these reports together and collecting data from them, right? And so we have a couple million data points now on honeybee health, right? And now some of this is basically people volunteering their time, right? We open source the data, and then they come and say, look, I developed this model that is able to predict the first bloom in the spring. Maybe you can use this some way, right? Someone developed an open source image recognition model that is able to separate out bees and wasps and bumblebees, which is quite useful because people can't tell the difference. So now we're able to separate out those reports and get each one to the right people, right? We're able to help them. But a lot of this is community led as well as people do something with what we've made available.
Are you going to start thinking of how do you extend the platform to different problems than bees?
Maybe. Basically, sustainability is becoming a bigger topic, especially in the EU, corporate properties, for example. And so we've looked at, well, could we use our data and some other data sets using APIs to connect to those to put together, for example, a bee friendliness map. And then businesses could use that. Say you're an apartment complex and you have some landscaping, and you're able to, and you have a metric for the bee friendliness of your area, and you're able to make improvements to your property that increase the bee friendliness of your area by, for example, planting more food sources, creating nesting space, that sort of thing. Would that have value for these commercial customers? Maybe, if they're able to then report in their impact metrics, which now more and more companies are having to do. But it's an area that I'm not as familiar with. I don't know how excited I am about going that route. There's probably money in it, but most likely, I mean, that's the direction we could go in. But really the goal is to turn this into the best possible tool it can be and then move on to the next project. The idea is that I scale back my work eventually to an hour or 2 a week, monitoring the system, and then just brings in revenue and runs along it. So,
got it. Right. So it's all sustained.
And a lot of the infrastructure is built, like we open source the data set. And so that data set just grows and grows and grows as more reports come in. A lot of the work we've done into SEO, getting swarms reported, that's one time or effort investment that we made that will now pay off for a while as the site just gets found by more people.
And if people wanted to extend the platform in any way and it was meaningful, you said you would maybe come back and be like, okay, that makes sense.
If there was a idea that made sense, we've turned down ideas too. Yeah. We get a lot of interesting ideas, but some just don't make sense or scalable or just don't make sense.
What's the least sensible recommendation you got?
Somebody wanted to adapt it to to breeding queen bees and like sharing alerts about when new queen bees are made available by breeders. Because they need to, like swarms, they need to be gotten from the breeder to the beekeeper quite quickly.
It's like with dogs when they breed.
Yeah,
like a super queen.
A little bit, but it seemed like it might be really similar to what we were already doing. But then we realized we'd actually need to change the underlying infrastructure quite a bit to fine tune the system to this. And such a niche use case, like you think the business now is niche, this is even more niche, and just was not worth the effort to make that happen. Although it would be a cool idea.
How did you say no to that person?
I told them they should build it in Lovable instead. I told them, I can't build this. Like, I'm not going to build this for you, but I think it's a cool idea and here's Lovable. Try it out and see if you can build an MVP for it. Maybe it works for you guys. Yeah.
Do you have any in-person meetings with beekeepers?
No, since most of the customers are in the US and Australia.
I see.
So I have a lot of late night calls with beekeeping associations and beekeepers all across the US. Yeah.
And then I guess let's start looking into the future. What's there?
All kinds of different ideas. I'm getting excited to build the next thing.
Yeah.
Right. This big new launch kept me. I've been doing this full time for the past 4 or 5 months now, which is a grind. Right. I spent a lot of time on this. The Kickstarter was a lot of learning and a lot of grind, and now slowly I feel like I've taken almost everything I can out of this, learning wise and creativity wise as well. What can be built? I wouldn't want to get into the feature drift and the product just gets worse and worse the more effort I put into it.
Yeah.
As I just layer on features that beekeepers don't want. So keeping it as streamlined and good product. I think we've now brought out the definitive version or in the process of bringing it out right now. And so more and more I'm excited to move on to the next thing.
Yeah. Do you know what is the next thing?
I have a couple of ideas. I want to do something with postcards.
Postcards?
With physical postcards.
Okay.
I'm interested in really broadly, what would a Snapchat for postcards look like? There are apps for your mom to use or for our moms to use and send greeting cards to their grandchildren, but not so much for younger people. And I think more and more you see a lot of a trend towards more meaningful social connection.
Mm-hmm.
Been tinkering around on this idea. I think it's fun when it's tangible at the end and you get a postcard. I think it's nice.
Yeah.
I just like postcards and I've been doing some user research around this. Yeah, I'm working on a project with a company, doing some consulting potentially for a company, building a gumball machine that can dispense seed bombs. These little clay balls that have wildflower seeds in them.
Okay.
And you can turn the handle on the gumball machine. Instead of a gumball, you get a seed bomb that you can throw and wildflowers grow. Totally different direction, but I think it would be super cool. And there's been some interest in building this into a product. Yeah.
How did you come across that one?
I saw it on Pinterest.
Okay.
Built, but I saw someone tried to do something like this. But of course, the devil's always in the details. And I thought I could do it better. And tinkered around on this, bought a vintage gumball machine, tore it down. Super interesting to see how this work on the inside. I tried to rebuild the mechanism with some 3D printed parts to be able to accommodate these seed bombs and the challenges that brings. And so it was interesting to work with a gear shaft and work with everything, and you can move and turn and tolerances and building a working dispenser like that. Gumball machines are simple yet complicated. And so it was an interesting product to work with and never quite perfected it. And then had some interest from a company to work on this together. And have them help to really turn this into a real product that they would then buy. So that's one idea. I've been more and more interested now in, as far as software goes, like tools too, and finding your perfect tech stack. I think knowing the right tools gives you superpowers, right? If you know how to integrate Lovable with Supabase and that there's an API for that, right? Or that that there's connect the right tools with things like Make and Zapier, right? You can connect everything at this point. And then been thinking around an idea of like how could people either showcase especially their no code and low code tech stacks, where you see a lot of engineers showcasing their tech stacks on GitHub. But what would like a showcasing and sharing your tech stacks look like for no code, low code, vibe coding, the tools that are more approachable as we now get into this like rapid development phase where everyone can become a founder of a software product. So been interested in that for like indie developers. That's another idea. Yeah, those are some of the ones that have been on my mind this week.
Yeah, that's this week.
Ask me again next week.
I knew it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. And then maybe as a sign off, where can people find your beekeeping stuff? Where can they find you? They want to connect with you, send you angry letter about their bees.
Yeah, angry letters always welcome. So the website is beeswarmed.org. I'll send you the URL. And I'm on LinkedIn at Mateo Kaiser.
Nice. Thank you so much.